Chapter 1. Absolute Defense. The words kept going through Victor's mind as he walked through the snow. He knew that he was not equipped to sneak into the factory that they had built in the shrine. Saving those kids had cost him a lot of credits, and he would have to spend a lot more to make sure he was properly equipped. He convinced himself that it would be worth it, although it had taken him years to gain the credits he had from collecting bounties on rogue augments. He had saved up for this goal the whole time. His memories took him back to his youth. He had never been very attentive to his parents' traditions. Their talk of the old ways had always seemed so pointless to him. Even more frustrating was their hope that the council would return and restore peace and order. Peace and order had disappeared long ago in favor of the instinct to survive. Victor's parents had told him of a time where there were no slaves and where the weak were defended by the strong. He never thought much about it until the augments attacked their farm. In the final moments, when hope had faded, they turned to Victor and gave him his purpose. It was only then that Victor had learned his father had located a shrine. Victor had never been allowed out of their farm for his safety, so the directions he had received meant nothing to him at the time, but he promised his parents that he would find it anyway. They made him promise that he would find its treasure, a divine key that granted amazing power to a chosen guardian. They made him promise to protect it and to find the one that was chosen to use it. Finally, they gave him a pack and pointed him to a secret exit. Being only 13 at the time, he did not fully appreciate what happened. They blew up the farm. They killed them and all the augments with them. Surviving on his own was difficult, but he had acquired enough skills shooting the birds that tried to eat their crops that he was able to have meat and trade for bread. After a year of wandering, he found the bounty board in New California. His hatred for augments and their philosophy, survival of the fittest, had made the idea of getting paid to bring back their heads desirable. After several years, he had become extremely skilled at killing augments. Certainly it had been dangerous, and he had nearly been killed many times. But even without cybernetic enhancements, he had found ways to best nearly every bounty posted on the board. New California was perfect for doing business. Victor made a mental note of all the items he intended to purchase. He needed rope, several more jerky rations, matches, and of course, ammunition. He needed lots and lots of ammunition. The snow crunched under his feet as he looked into the sky. It was almost noon, which meant he would see the horizon glow briefly with sunlight before returning to the almost ever-present darkness. His travels had taken him near the hot zone, so he knew what sunlight was, unlike the slaves that lived in this region, but he found it easier to hunt in the cold zone. There were also fewer demon worshippers near the cold zone. If there was anyone Victor hated more than the augments, it was demon worshippers. The augments would only kill people when they thought they could benefit. Demon worshippers killed for the pleasure they got from the pain of others. It sickened Victor. His parents had taught him about the demons as well. It was all a part of the old ways. The guardians of the divine keys had spent their time fighting those that possessed demonic keys, which granted the users terrible powers. The few that still held any belief in the power of divine keys believed that the Destroyer used such powers to murder the Grand Council and plunge the earth into the ruined state in which they lived. Victor's parents had said that before the Destroyer, there were no hot and cold zones. After Victor's parents had died, and he had acquired enough credits and weapons to survive, he had begun efforts to find the shrine his father had found. He learned very quickly that asking questions about divine keys was dangerous. Many augments viewed these questions as heretical. Such views in ages past had apparently been detrimental to their philosophy of survival of the fittest, and they took extra effort to make life unpleasant for those that objected to their philosophy. After getting a few scars, Victor learned to research his project discreetly. Eventually, he uncovered a series of symbols that were associated with the divine keys, which he carried with him. He found the best people to ask about the symbols were the rogue augments he was hunting. Almost all of them were willing to be helpful if they thought they could survive. Of course, he never promised his bounty's survival, because he had to support himself, but they were willing to use the mercy of someone who seemed kind. They were always disappointed when they found out that Victor was not actually offering them freedom, but their disappointment never lasted long. He would thank them for their help and then shoot them in the heart, so as to maintain the integrity of the head when collecting his bounty. His last bounty had actually claimed he had come from the shrine. Victor assumed that he was lying because it was so close to Mary's village, and turned in the augment's head for 2,000 credits. After collecting the reward, he decided to explore the area, and to his surprise, he had found Stephen and Julie. Stephen had corroborated the augment's story. It was the first really tangible piece of information that he had found to help him keep the promises he had made to his parents before they died to protect him. The sound of something rustling in the snow suddenly pulled Victor out of his thought. He focused all his senses on what was around him. He slowed his breathing and strained his ears as he looked back and forth. After a few minutes of no sound, he continued cautiously. He was less than a mile outside of New California, but he knew better than to let down his guard. Whoever or whatever was following him was very quick. Victor rested his hand on the grip of his pistol as he pressed forward. Finally, the flickering lights of the buildings in New California came into view. There were slaves running in and out of buildings carrying satchels and pitchers and various other things for their masters. The look of fear in their eyes when Victor approached made him sick. If he thought he could, he would free them, but protesting the practice publicly could get him killed and the slaves severely punished, so he held his peace. The sound of old music filled the street. Victor followed the sound, knowing it came from a diner that served his favorite food, cheeseburgers. The odor of greasy beef filled his nose, and in spite of the cold, he loosened his scarf to take in more of the smell. His mouth watered as he imagined the sensation of the smooth bun and the bright color of the ketchup. He had not eaten for hours, and he was exhausted. He decided to indulge in a meal. Victor opened the doors of the diner and walked in. Buzzing and flickering electric light bulbs dimly lit the worn tables. The imperfect diamond pattern in the broken floor tiles made this diner far classier than the sticky cement-floored restaurants that competed with this establishment. Victor shook the snow off of his coat and inadvertently brushed some onto a patron sitting at a chair near the door. "Hey!" shouted the customer. "Why don't you pay attention?" "Sorry," replied Victor. "I was just trying to get the snow off my coat, and I don't care about your life story," shouted the customer, cutting Victor off. "Just quit it." "Sorry," said Victor. He surveyed the mostly empty room and chose a seat at a table that faced the door. After sitting down, Victor peeled a sticky laminated menu card from the table. The prices were high, but the sound of sizzling meat mixed with the crackly music made him smile as he saw the cheeseburger listed. Suddenly he was interrupted by a strange voice. "This seat taken?" The question was directed to him, and the person asking it was a tall, slender man in a tan coat. Victor frowned as the man took the seat on the opposite side of Victor's table. "Sorry to startle you," hissed the uninvited guest. "I'm not buying anything for you," said Victor coldly. "I'm not here for that," said the man. He made air quote gestures for the word "that," adding to Victor's opinion that this man was most likely here for a free meal, in spite of his statement. "What are you here for?" asked Victor. "I'm trying to meet new people," said the man, again using air quotes. "You know, expand, be adventurous." "You're trying to get a free meal," accused Victor. "Well, since you offered," said the man as he grabbed the menu from Victor. "I didn't offer," said Victor angrily. "No take-backs," said the man, again using air quotes. Victor rolled his eyes and then moved to another table and looked at the menu there. He glanced back to his previous table to make sure he was not followed, and noticed it was empty. He looked ahead and noticed that the tall man had joined him at his table so quickly that he was not able to see him. "You're fast," said Victor. "Fortune favors the fast," said the man with air quotes, "if you know what I mean." "Actually," said Victor, "I have no idea what you mean. Who are you?" "Name's Ulysses Carter," replied the man, "but most people call me Lizard. Most people don't expect me to be as fast as I am." Victor pulled out his pistol, cocked it, and pointed it at Lizard. "Hey," said Lizard slowly, "easy, man. Just take it easy." "If I had to guess," said Victor in a low voice, "I'd say your ability is augmented, probably by technology." No, said Lizard. "I am 100% natural. What you see is what you get." His air quote gesture annoyed Victor. "I don't believe you," said Victor. "What do I need to do to convince you?" asked Lizard. "You can start by telling me the real reason you are following me," said Victor. "You were pointed out to me as one who has been to the shrine out in the east," said Lizard. Victor's eyes grew wide. Who knew that he had been to the shrine? Who would have told it to this odd man? What good would that information be to him? Victor was confused. "What could an augment possibly want with that shrine?" asked Victor. "Nothing," replied Lizard. "Like I said, I'm not an augment." Victor suddenly wondered if this man's interest in the shrine was motivated by a worship of demon power. "You realize that is not a demon shrine," said Victor as he furrowed his brow and aimed his gun barrel directly at Lizard's heart. "If your speed is granted to you by a demon key, you will be equally disappointed." To Victor's surprise, Lizard narrowed his eyes angrily, as if he was offended by Victor's implication. "I am not one of them," said Lizard with his air quotes. "Listen, I thought an experienced individual might help me locate something. If you're just going to point guns at me and call me a demon worshiper, then I'll leave you be. If you're interested in eating something better than you can order from that menu, I'm sure you can figure out where to find me." Lizard got up and scurried quickly out the door with incredible speed. Napkins flew into the air as he passed and slowly drifted down to the dirty tiles on the ground. Victor suddenly wondered if he had made a mistake. If this character was not a demon worshipper and not an augment, then perhaps he was a believer in the Grand Council. Or perhaps he was just trying to portray himself that way. Victor put his pistol away. After a few moments, a waitress approached Victor. She had a thick layer of makeup on and a tall beehive-shaped hairdo. In spite of this, she had a very feminine figure, and she looked like she was intentionally swinging her hips as she walked toward him. "Thank you," said Victor. "I'll have a cheeseburger." "I hate to say this, pal," she said softly, "but since you seem to be the type that feels comfortable threatening other customers with a weapon, we have to ask you to prepay." "Prepay?" asked Victor angrily. The waitress batted her artificially long eyelashes shamelessly. Victor decided that she had not been the one to make this decision. She was probably a slave that had been sent to get him to agree to it. Victor scowled. "Fine." Victor got out his payment drive. The waitress provided a payment machine. The flashing screen on the device showed the price had doubled. 120 credits for a cheeseburger?" said Victor angrily. "Well, you could find somewhere else to eat tonight," said the waitress. "I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to bend the rules." "Fine," muttered Victor. He put the drive into the register and watched the light flash, indicating the transaction was complete. "Thank you," said the waitress. "Oh, I had one other thing to tell you." "What?" asked Victor with a hint of exhaustion in his voice. "I don't like how you talk about augments," she said as two mechanical arms burst through the sides of the dress she was wearing and picked Victor up by his throat. He tried to pull her off his neck, but it was all he could do to hold on to her mechanical arms to keep her from ripping his head off as she dragged him to the door, opened it, and threw him into the snow outside. At least give me my money back, said Victor desperately. The waitress laughed cruelly. You key worshippers don't need money, right? She chided. Can't you just pray for food from your guardians or something? Victor clenched his teeth angrily. I didn't think so, and that is why augments will survive, and you will die. The waitress slammed the door. Victor got to his feet and rubbed his neck. Suddenly he became aware of several cloaked men surrounding him with guns pointed at him. Really? Asked Victor with frustration. Keep your weapon holstered, said one of them, and keep your hands up. Victor slowly raised his hands into the air. Two of the men approached him, and one of them took his gun. One of my men says you were speaking with Lizard. Is this true? Define speaking with, said Victor, recalling his conversation with Lizard. The cloaked man nearest him struck him across the face, making him stumble onto the ground. Another kicked him in the gut to get him back to his knees. He coughed and slowly got back to his feet. As an example, said the first cloaked man, I am speaking with you. Then yes, choked Victor. I was speaking with him. I was no more his friend than you are mine. Friendship is trivial, replied the cloaked man. His current whereabouts and his destination are the things I seek. Victor looked at the men silently for a moment. He wondered how information was moving so quickly. How had Lizard known about the shrine? How had they known he had spoken to Lizard after it had just happened? Please do not hide this thing from me, said the cloaked man impatiently. You said yourself he was no friend of yours. And you are my friend? Asked Victor defiantly. The man chuckled softly. Certainly I am, he said. My comrades would prefer to progressively remove your limbs until you tell us what we want. I do not wish to see harm come to you, though. His sadistic tone made Victor sick. He thought about Lizard. Even if he thought the Guardians were real, Victor felt no obligation to him. He did need to survive himself, though. He had promises to keep. There is a shrine to the east, said Victor slowly. He is headed there. Very nice, replied the cloaked man. We will now verify your claim. Victor and the 5 cloaked men walked out of New California east toward the shrine. This was not the way that Victor had planned to go there. He intended to have an arsenal. He intended to find the divine key that was hidden there. Instead, he was walking with his wrists bound behind his back and trudging through the snow at the urging of gun barrels. Victor yawned in spite of his shivering. He was exhausted. He had not slept in his haste to get to New California. Finally, his weariness forced him to speak. You do not wish to make camp? He asked. Why would I wish such a thing? Asked the leader of the cloaked men. Another of the men struck Victor, forcing him to stumble into the snow. The others jabbed him with their gun barrels, forcing him to get back up. Suddenly they stopped moving and listened for signs that they might not be alone. While Victor heard nothing, the pause made him glad. Even if they were about to be attacked, each step was becoming more and more exhausting. After a few moments of silence, a young man jumped out of a nearby tree in a long white coat. He had a pair of swords sheathed on his back. Victor judged that he could be no more than 18 years old, but he appeared remarkably healthy. Most youth appeared to be starving, diseased, or obviously augmented technologically, but he defied any of these categories. He had short brown hair and bright blue eyes. He did not appear to be tattooed, and he was clean-shaven. "Hi, guys," said the young man cheerfully. "Maybe you can help me. I'm lost." Victor's eyes widened. That seemed so unlikely, it was ridiculous. A youth, traveling alone, got lost? Apparently the cloaked men agreed with Victor's assessment. "Do we look stupid?" asked their leader. "Is that a trick question?" he asked. His brazen attitude impressed Victor, considering the high likelihood that he would soon be killed. "Anyway, I can pay you." Two of the cloaked men suddenly used tremendous speed and rushed to the youth, stripping him of his weapons and pushing him into the snow. One of them grabbed his credit drive and pressed the indicator button on it. 30,000 credits? "Impressive!" exclaimed the man holding it. "I'm willing to pay you 1,000 for helping me," said the young man. "Why would we settle for that when we can take all of it?" asked the leader. He motioned to his men, and they swiftly scurried toward the boy and bound his wrists. "Also," said the leader, "you will make fine laborers." "Slavers," muttered Victor. "You make me sick." One of the men struck Victor again. "Why should that be?" asked the leader. "I make money and provide you with long-term employment." Victor looked at the youth. He smiled and shrugged innocently. "I don't know who you are," whispered Victor, "but surely you realize what you did was foolish." "You're probably right," whispered the young man. "I'm trying to impress a girl." His indifference baffled Victor. "By getting sold into slavery?" asked Victor. "Yeah," he replied. "It was more impressive when I imagined it. I wasn't counting on these guys having demon keys." Suddenly the leader of the cloaked men rushed with immense speed in between Victor and the young man. "We don't have the original key," said the leader, "but we do have copies." He pulled a chain up from about his neck and revealed a black key. "If you had faced our master, you would truly know what speed is." "Even his goons have this much power," muttered Victor. "I'm Jonathan, by the way," said the young man. "Victor," whispered Victor with a nod. Slowly Victor, the boy, and the 5 cloaked men made their way east. Victor was especially upset that he could not cover his nose in the freezing air, but he tried to hide his annoyance, knowing that demon worshippers would try and exploit his discomfort. The only thing he could not hide was his exhaustion, and while continually being forced to tread through snow was not pleasant, it was less painful than some of the things he had seen done to children that Mary had treated. To Victor's surprise, Jonathan remained upbeat and cheerful, even as the men shoved him forward with their guns. At length they came across a wagon. A young boy that Victor guessed might be 10 years old stood next to it, bundled in a thick coat. He held a small sign with hand-painted letters that read, "Seeking Slave Labor." Victor frowned with disgust. "Really?" he asked. "Aren't you a bit young for that?" "Hey!" shouted the young boy excitedly. "You found my slave!" "What?" exclaimed Victor. "I'm not your slave." "Not you, him," said the young boy as he pointed to Jonathan. The leader of the cloaked men turned to Jonathan. "So that's why you were wanting to escape," he observed. Jonathan shrugged and smiled innocently. "No hard feelings, right?" said Jonathan. The cloaked man turned to the young boy. "He is now in our possession," said the leader, "but we would be willing to sell them to you." "Sell them?" shouted the boy angrily. "Since I know you stole my 30,000 credits, what do you say I take both of these guys and then don't kill you?" The cloaked men laughed at the young boy. Victor was shocked. This child was even more brazen than Jonathan. "You can't kill us," said the leader confidently. The boy pulled out a pump-action shotgun and in a smooth motion pumped it and pointed it at the leader. "Why not?" he asked with equal confidence. In a blur, the cloaked men rushed toward and surrounded the boy, pointing their weapons at him. "Because we are far too fast for you," said the leader. "Maybe," said the boy. Suddenly another blur sped through the group, and every one of the cloaked men found themselves disarmed. They spun around in confusion. Victor suddenly noticed Lizard standing next to Jonathan, holding all their guns. "But he's not," said the boy. "Lizard!" exclaimed the leader angrily. Lizard rushed in a blur again, and a moment later, Jonathan was free of his bonds, holding his swords. Suddenly Victor felt his arms being pushed and noticed that he was free and armed with his handgun again. "Felix is getting desperate if he's sending you," hissed Lizard. Jonathan leapt toward one of the cloaked men, but he sped away before Jonathan's sword could slash him. One of the others dove toward the young boy, but was quickly dispatched by the boy's shotgun. The others scattered in different directions, but suddenly Lizard leapt after them. In another moment, he stood holding their black keys, and they could no longer move as quickly. "Wait!" pled the leader. He was obviously feeling slow and vulnerable without the power of his black key. "Please, we surrender." Victor felt a great swell of rage, and he rushed toward the leader with his handgun. "Don't!" pled the leader. Everyone watched to see what Victor would do. After a moment of heavy breathing with the barrel of his pistol against the head of the leader, Victor grabbed Jonathan's credit drive from another chain around the leader's neck and tossed it to Jonathan. "This is yours," said Victor. "Thanks," said Jonathan happily. Suddenly a woman in a long white cloak rushed up next to Lizard. She had long dark hair and dark blue eyes. Victor found her quite beautiful, although she was probably no more than 19 years old. "Kirana, you made it!" exclaimed Lizard. Jonathan seemed especially excited to see her. "Did you see how well I handle my swords, Kirana?" he asked excitedly. Kirana had no emotion on her face at all. She examined everyone for a moment to assess the situation, seeming to ignore Jonathan completely. "Tie the demon worshippers up," she commanded. "We need to catch up to Sig." "You can count on me," said Jonathan cheerfully. He took out a length of rope from the wagon where the boy had stood. Using the rope, he tied the 4 remaining cloaked men together. He retrieved a marker from the wagon and picked up the "Seeking Slave Labor" sign that the boy had been holding. With a wide smile on his face, he crossed out the word "seeking" and wrote above it, "volunteering for," then tied it to the leader.